this week I was going to go ahead with the Eightfold Path, but so many people have called and wanted to talk to me about anxiety that I thought I would do that. I would stick with dukkha a little longer. You remember, dukkha is the mental element of suffering. It's not that you're sick or you have a pain or that you've been hurt in a car crash. It's the mental anguish that goes on to say, oh my God, I'm sick. I can't get my kids to school. Who's going to help me? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? And right now, the whole culture is kind of awash with anxiety. When I turn on the news, it feels to me as if the hysteria of the people on the TV screen is barely sublimated. There's so much that's collapsing about our culture, about our government, about our economy that we thought was firm, that we thought was bulletproof and fixed. And the fear is rampant. And so I began telling you the story about a friend of mine who I spoke to the other day, asked him how he was, and he said, I'm fine. I'm not worried about this virus at all. This is just a hoax. I was shocked because he's a smart fellow. I said, what do you mean? And he went on a long rant about a couple of doctors in the Central Valley who were reciting their data and saying that everything was overblown. We can open up the society. We should do this. And I appreciate skepticism, but I think it behooves us, if we're skeptical, to be equally skeptical about our own thoughts and our own point of view. So I did some research on this, and all the health experts were criticizing these doctors for kind of extrapolating from a small subset of the population to the national picture. And I tried to talk about it with my friend, but he got very, very angry and accused me of being unwilling to check with the science and follow the data. And he went on to insist that Dr. Fauci worked for Bill Gates and all of this is a plot to get us all forcibly vaccinated. Anyway, it made me think that he was suffering. He was very angry. He was feeling beleaguered, feeling like he or his friends were the only ones that knew what was going on. And I thought, wow, what must it feel like to feel that way? It's called paranoia, that the entire superstructure of your society is turned against you. That's a very heightened kind of anxiety because there's no refuge from it, is there? And, I spent most of my life in the radical left. I'm highly critical of many aspects of my government's behavior. And the fact that during the Trump administration, I found myself defending the FBI and the CIA. It's kind of an irony, but it's a good reminder that everything changes. Circumstances change. So one of the things I wanted to point out about anxiety is that it's one point of view. Last week, I mentioned that there are two equally valid ways of looking at reality. The one is through our sense of self. We have a self-awareness. I feel my body. Proprioception tells me where I am in space. And that self-awareness I call I. And over time and through habit and through what I'm told about myself and what I deduce about myself, that sense of I begins to take on fixed characteristics. And when that happens, we begin to lose our freedom of mobility. When we begin saying, I always do such and such, or I'm the kind of guy that, it's true, we all have predilections. But meditating will teach you that this sense of self is basically just an awareness. Eyes have awareness, ears have awareness, body has awareness, mind has awareness, and kind of organizes all the others. But there's no little person behind our forehead doing our hearing, seeing, and thinking. So the reason I point that out is that that's our everyday quotidian way of looking at the world. And it's not that it's false. Buddha would never say whether the self existed or didn't exist. He said it wasn't fixed. But there's another equally true way of looking at the world. And I've said this, so I'll speed through it. And that is, yourself has never been separate from oxygen, sunlight, microbes in the soil that feed it, pollinating insects, birds that control the pests, people milling and spinning and carding and sewing cotton, making your clothing. So it's equally true that the sense of isolated separateness is kind of an illusion. We're also equally a part of one big thing, like little ticks on the body of a dog. So anxiety is actually only kind of functions when we're in a self-centered, self-concerned point of view. And I don't want to judge it, because feeling anything is okay. It's not crazy. Feeling something and not wanting to feel it, that's much closer to crazy. So once you understand that there is no permanent self in there that's being warped or hurt or damaged by whatever comes up, it's kind of like going to the movies. We can watch Freddy Krueger and the Chainsaw Massacres because we know it's a projection on a screen. But we don't know that our thoughts are projections of our awareness on the screen of our awareness, or we forget. And meditating allows us to get a kind of perch, to preoccupy ourselves with enough stuff that the mind can't grab all of us. And from there, we practice watching the mind. And because we're still and because we're quiet, we're not sending any impulses to the mind. And it gradually slows down. And even when you meditate for 10 minutes, if you pay attention, you'll find little caesuras, little spaces where there's nothing going on. And that gets more pronounced the more you do it. You have to give yourself enough time for a lot of your dramatic narratives to get boring. My daddy did this to me. My mommy did this to me. My brother did this to me. And at a certain point, you've been through it so much, you just can't bear to tell yourself the story anymore. It goes away, and you're rewarded by a kind of emptiness. So the thing about suffering is it's always related to grasping. So what are the things that we're grasping? Well, the idea of a fixed self gives us the idea that it's graspable, that we can attach to it, that we can somehow control its fate. We can help. That's why our ego's there. Our ego would not have survived evolution if it didn't serve us. Brush your teeth, get enough sleep, drink water when you're thirsty. It has a function. It's not the enemy. The enemy is that when your idea of your ego is so fixed that it limits you to the degree that you resent your lack of freedom. You begin chafing against it, and that begins to generate mental responses. So-and-so gets to do that. Why can't I? You probably can. But is it a good idea? You might want to think about it. So remember I said Americans will say, I'm angry. When we say I'm angry, that's the totality of ourself. When we say I'm anxious, that's the totality of ourself. We've surrendered. We've lost the dual perspective. Yeah, I feel separate. You're over there and I'm over here. But that separation is an illusion. So the idea that I have an independent life is actually an illusion. If there's no sunshine, you wouldn't be here. If there's no water, you wouldn't be here. So you're not independent of those things. So our ideas of freedom, our ideas of comparing, all based on this idea of separation and a separate self. Suzuki Roshi used to say, everything's perfect until you compare. So right now, there's a national anxiety. America seems to be losing its preeminence in the world. That's something that disturbs a lot of people. And if you're fearful and you only look at things from one point of view, you're going to feel that those other people that are getting stronger are going to take advantage of you because you would take advantage of them. So it's always a big mirror. It's always a big reflection. So our economy is hurt. We're distancing. We're lonely. We're stuck in our houses. People don't want to get sick. They begin worrying about what will happen to my children. Will I die and unattended with a ventilator in my mouth? Well, you can take care of yourself without being anxious or frightened. When I go outside, I wear gloves. I put on a hat that I can throw in the washing machine. I leave the shoes I'm wearing outside. I wear gloves and a mask. And I do it not just because I'm protecting myself, but I'm protecting you. So when I see people in a mask, I don't see a whole bunch of selfish people. I see people that are being considerate of other people. And I said to my friend, well, if you're right, wearing a mask is an inconvenience, and gloves and distancing is an inconvenience. But if you're wrong, you can harm a lot of people. So I'd rather err on the side of caution. But let's get back to anxiety. So one thing to do is look at it, become intimate with it. Where is it in your body? For most people, anxiety is the inability to breathe. You hear something at night in the house and you go, and you hold your breath and listen because even your breathing makes a sound and you want all your attention on it. So breath has a great deal to do with anxiety. So if you're paying attention to your breath and you're letting it go uninterrupted and you're following each exhale, it's a very good antidote for anxiety. It's hard to be anxious when you're breathing. This virus is invisible. You don't know who you can catch it from. You don't know how you can catch it. But the way it spreads is known. So we know that there's a certain number of things that we can learn. We can learn to wear gloves. They remind us not to touch our face. We can learn to wear masks. Reminds us not to touch our face. If we stay focused on the anxiety, we'll see it disappears. If we just allow it to be anxiety, there's nothing wrong with being anxious. If you just sit with it, you can't hold on to a good mood. You can't hold on to a bad mood. But if you fight it, it's like going to the gym. We lift weights, we do curls. Resisting muscle makes it stronger. Anything you don't want to feel owns you. Anything you don't want to feel owns you. And you have the power to change your mind, to focus your attention on your breath. No one can tell that you're doing it. But if you're being disturbed by something and you don't have the space to deal with it, just start thinking about your exhales, one breath at a time. And when you do that 2 or 3 times, your mind is clear. I do it before I answer the phone. I always take one exhale before I answer the phone. I don't know who's calling. I want to be neutral. Another thing that's helpful for anxiety is not knowing. To the extent that we think we know things, we think we can control things. But a lot of the things we know are just delusions. I was thinking today about the Vietnam War because it was published today on the news that the number of people that have died in 3 months are now larger than the number of people that died over the 10 or 12 years of the Vietnam War. And I was thinking about that war, and I narrated the Ken Burns documentary about the war. Well, we killed 3 million people in Cambodia and Vietnam, and we dropped defoliants across the plain of jars that turned it into a desert and damaged the gene pools of not only the Cambodians and the Vietnamese, but the American soldiers who were there. There have been a lot of problems with it, and we did it because of a delusion. Political leaders are no more exempt than we are. They had this theory, the domino theory, that if Vietnam was not defended by us, it would become a communist country. And then their thinking led them down like chess players. Seemed so logical, seemed so clear. And then one day it was over. What did it all amount to? So that was based on anxiety. It was based on the idea that strangers were going to come in to occupy our country, take away what we have, diminish our sources of wealth, diminish our access to foreign markets. You can trot that pony all day long. And then you can build a logic based on that supposition. But it's just completely empty. You can do a lot of damage if you don't realize as a human how dangerous you are, how dangerous we are. Me too. All of us. And so one reason that we practice is to be mindful of what's coming over the spinal telephone. What are we thinking? What are we feeling? Thinking is a mental act, and it prefigures physical acts. I've given you this example many times of giving someone the finger when they cut you off. It's like pulling a trigger. Some people have a gun when they do it. So here we are. We're just all bozos on the bus, as my friend Dick Gray says. We're just human beings. And just is an exaggeration, but it balances the idea of us as the top of the food chain, the reason for evolution. So the surest antidote that I know for anxiety, any form of anxiety, is thinking about other people. I guarantee you, if you start to think of somebody that you know who's suffering, and you start to imagine what you could do to help them or help anyone, and start to get involved in the strategy and the tactics of doing that, your anxiety will diminish. I promise you. Doesn't mean the problem has gone away, but it means an insoluble problem that you can't affect has stopped dominating your attention. And you've reclaimed the power of controlling your attention. Sounds pretty simple, but it takes practice because our mind is endlessly interesting. I mean, when I was a kid and I'd misbehave and they'd stand me in the corner, I would get interested in the wallpaper. So my dramas, my stories, my struggles, the ways I've been abused, God, these are endlessly fascinating. And it's all just completely self-involved. So I want to say one other thing before I stop today. About 10 years ago, I was in a documentary and I narrated it called Fishhead. You can find it online, Fishhead. And it was funded by a wealthy Polish or Czech guy And it began with a Harvard study on sociopaths. So the way they defined it was a sociopath was somebody who doesn't experience guilt or remorse or shame. And all their relationships with other people are strategic. How can I triumph? How can I get what I want? And they're very smart. We think of sociopaths as, Ted Bundy, serial killers, chop and hack. But if a sociopath is raised in a good home, has a good education, has ample opportunity to satisfy themselves, they just become a sociopath. They don't kill other people. They just vanquish them. So these Harvard professors got interested in this, and they disguised the test. And they gave it to the masters of the universe on Wall Street. And they were surprised by the extraordinarily high incidence of sociopaths on Wall Street. People who were out for gain, who were not really trying to enhance the social good. They just wanted to win. They wanted more money than the other one. And when I was growing up, Wall Street used to be the source of capital for business and investments and things like that. But with hedge funds and derivatives, it's become more about just making money. So in this film, the first third of the film studied sociopaths, and the guy said, oh, so that's the problem. 20% of the people are sociopaths. That's the problem. The second half of the program, the second third of the program said, but wait a minute, a lot of people seem to think that being a sociopath is good. A lot of people are emulating sociopaths. And it went on to a big study about all the mood-altering drugs people are taking so that they can continue to do widgets or whatever it is they have to do and not feel shame or anxiety or stuff like that. Very detailed, the numbers of people that are actually doing this in therapy, taking chemicals, having their psychology medicalized. So then at the end of that third, the fellow said, I see. So the problem is the sociopaths and the people like them that are making everything so miserable. And then they said, but wait a minute. What about us? What are we doing? And then they pointed out that human beings are a herd animal. And it's pretty well known that when 5% of a herd understand something, like when 5% of the buffalo discover where the water is, they go running and the whole herd follows. So with that information, the film concluded by saying, oh, okay. So the first thing to know is, how many are we? And the second thing is, what are you going to do? You meaning me, you, all of us. Well, we're meditating. We're studying ourselves. I think we're counting each other. I think the process of real democracy is an accounting. How many are we? So we'll see. But the best way to proceed through all of this is to be able to face fear and to be able to face anxiety, not to be ashamed of it, but to recognize it and do what you have to do anyway. Do what you have to do anyway. Soldiers are afraid, believe me, but they do what they have to do. They won't be stopped by their fear. They don't even have the luxury of dwelling on it till maybe later. I had a friend who was in the CIA who was an undercover operative in Moscow. And he told me that they had this technique where they would hold a hot coffee pot, a hot coffee cup, and they would do something. And for the duration of his mission, he felt nothing. He left Russia when they called him in a train station one day over the loudspeakers by his real name. But when he got home from the mission, he would fall apart. So I'm not suggesting that we do tricks to feel nothing. I'm suggesting we feel the anxiety, we feel the fear, we understand it, And then we say, okay, I'm tough enough. I can do this. I can take this. And if it gets heavy, I'll shift my concentration to my breath. I'll come back to it. It's human. It's natural. You can deal with it. So I'm urging you to look at your anxiety. Be intimate with it. Follow the trains of thought. Can you track them down? Can you correct them? Can you see where they're leading you in places you don't want to go?